Okay, so we'll keep moving on with the kinds of things that we're working with inside After Effects. I mentioned the toolbar before when we gave you the tour of the overall workspace, but now that we have a composition, you can see that all of those tools are now active, and we can just we'll go through them as we're using them, but just to give you an idea of the names, so that if they come up, then you'll know what we're working with. The first tool is the selection tool, and you can see the keyboard shortcut is V. If you move over, you can see that if you hover, you get those tooltips that pop up. If the tooltips are not coming up on your computer, you can set the preferences so that they will. I think, let's see. Yep, right there at the top of the general, the show tooltips. If this isn't selected, then when you hover over something, it's not going to give you that information. Sometimes when you're familiar enough with After Effects, you don't need those tooltips, and you can turn them off. But when you're learning, it's definitely good to have them turned on. So the first one is the selection tool. The keyboard shortcut is V. Some of the keyboard shortcuts will be similar to the other things that you're working with in other Adobe programs, and other things will be different. So you just have to keep in mind how that works. And the selection tool is what we'll use is where, like for example, if we want to click on a particular layer, if we want to pick it up and move it over, if we want to make an adjustment with the position of a layer, we can use the regular selection tool to do all of those kinds of things. The hand tool, keyboard shortcut is H, and this is going to let us move through something. So for example, if we're zoomed into our composition and we want to make some adjustments by looking in different areas, if we want to see what this guy looks like up against this background, we can use the hand tool to move through a space and see what's going on without making any changes to the position or the effect of a particular element. The same kind of thing is happening with the zoom tool. We can zoom in. If we hold down the Option key, we can zoom out. See, we can hit the H to go back to hand and then bring it over here. So all of these are selection tools and viewing tools. So you can see that there are little vertical lines that separate the tools out, and you can see that as we move through them, they're going to have some different things to offer. So the next tool is the rotation tool, and that keyboard shortcut is W. And then we've got some camera tools, and you can see that there's a little notch in the bottom corner, and I know I mentioned this before, but if there's a notch there, if you hold down on the tool, then you can see that there are other tools that pop up behind it. And so you can see that these all have the same keyboard shortcut. It just depends on what's selected. And we'll talk more about these certainly when we get into the idea of cameras. The next one is the pan behind tool, and again, this is connected to the cameras, so we'll get into that when we talk about those. And now we're getting into actually some of the different elements that After Effects will generate for you. The first one is a shape tool, and if we click on it, you can see that the keyboard shortcut is Q. And then we've got rectangle and rounded rectangle, ellipse, polygon, and star tools. And so as we work with tools and shapes, we'll talk more about these, but just so that you know that they're there. We also have a pen tool, and then we add and delete and convert vertexes. Keyboard shortcut is G, which is definitely different than we've worked with in other programs, but the pen tool will let us create masks, it will let us create paths, it will let us modify some of the existing things within After Effects. The next tool is the type tool, and we've got two options, the horizontal and the vertical type. Command T is our keyboard shortcut for using the type tool, and we've got a lot of different kinds of parameters that we'll work with whenever we're working with that. So then we've got another little vertical line, and we have a brush tool, a clone stamp tool, and an eraser tool. So as we're creating things and modifying things, we'll be using those. We have a roto brush tool, which is definitely an interesting part of what After Effects can do, but we'll talk more about that as we go. And then we have a puppet pin tool, puppet overlap tool, and puppet starch tool. And when we discuss the puppet tool, we'll talk more about what each of these elements does for us. So that's the overview of the toolbar, and lots of different ways that we can work with those. And whether you work with the interface in keyboard shortcuts, or whether you're more comfortable working with the tools by selecting them with the mouse, completely up to you. Just get used to working as efficiently as possible. And to be completely honest, the sooner you get used to the idea of keyboard shortcuts, the easier it will be for you to be efficient in the programs, whether it's After Effects or Premiere or Photoshop or any of the different programs that you're working with. And we are kind of moving fairly quickly in terms of After Effects, and it's more to give you sort of a taste of what all of the things are, and then in subsequent tutorials we'll go back in and be more specific about all of the different parameters and the different pieces of information and what you're actually dealing with. So if you feel like we're going a little fast, don't worry, it's more to do with the idea of giving you an introduction than sort of setting the scene for how everything's going to go. Okay, so we have our sequence for steps 3 open down here in our timeline. And you can see that we have the layer name, and then we have soldier, soldier with hat, tennis ball, and steps. If we click on layer name, it changes to source name. And then you can see that we have steps/steps.psd and tennis ball/steps.psd. And you'll notice that these are the same pieces of information that we see inside our bin with our layers information. Source name, it doesn't change. It's all about what piece of information are you working with from your project. Layer name is something that should be a little bit more user-friendly, should be a little bit more connected to what you're actually doing with it. And so if I click on my layer name and I click enter, that lets me, or return, that lets me actually change the name of that particular layer, and that can be useful for project organization and reference and things like that. So for example, if I wanted this soldier's name to be Gary, I can do that. So if I remember that Gary is the one without the hat, that can help me be more efficient in the way that I'm working. If I want to name my soldier with hat, we can just jump back and you can see that we've got this here. And if I have source name and I want to hit enter, you can see it takes me back to layer names. So source name never changes, and that's useful because if you've renamed a lot of different kinds of things and you want to get back to exactly what's happening here, and maybe you have hundreds or thousands of elements inside your project, the source name is going to help you get back to that original piece. And if we call this one Gordon, then we've got those two together. So you can see the, hopefully you can see the importance of organization and being able to create that kind of naming system for yourself. One of the other things that we can do inside the composition is create duplicates of our material. And so if I select this and I come up to edit, you can see that there's an option for duplicate. And if I do Command D, you can see the keyboard shortcut here, then we've got that. So now we've got Gary and Gary 2. And Gary 2 is created in the same position as Gary. If I click and drag, then you can see that we've got two Garys that are here. And so again, still coming from the same source material, but this way I can have two treatments and do some different things with them if I want to.